Welcome to the BiCurean podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is BiCurean, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of BiCurean, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the BiCurean moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the BiCurean.
Welcome to the BiCurean podcast. I'm Aisela.
And I'm Eric.
And this week, we're going to talk about National Coming Out Day, which is tomorrow, Friday, October 11th.
Yeah. I love the idea of having a day where people can rally around, coming out by choice, if they feel prepared. And just acknowledgement, I think, that coming out is a difficult thing for a lot of people. In general, I think we all want to be the people that we want to be and actually be recognized as the people that we are. So, in theory, I like it, but I also get that it is definitely something difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, so I'm going to rewind in that there's this huge emotional experience, right? Like, and we talk about coming out, and National Coming Out Day is about LGBTQ people. That it was founded by a gay man in the 80s. However, there's also a piece that I would love for us to touch on as we talk a little bit more about the concept of coming out as a form of mental health. In terms of when you feel like you have a secret, or you feel like you're hiding yourself from the people that you care about, that can really weigh on you, and it can cause a lot of mental health issues and depression and feelings of isolation. And so there's a larger context for it than the LGBTQ community. But I do want to talk a little bit about that that foundation of the concept, and then maybe get into a little bit more of the different ways that it plays out and the impact that it can have.
Yeah. Well, as usual, you did some research.
What? No, I didn't. Yes, I did.
I think one thing that happens is we get kind of caught up in our bubbles of what we know, what we knew when we were young, and what we expect when we're older. And that's why history, of course, is so important, right? Because we can see documentation of things that happened, and you caught on to some very interesting things around just gay culture in general.
Yeah, it was, and I didn't dig too deep in terms of like spending a ton of time. I did sort of more of I wouldn't say surface because I don't really believe in that, but I did a more curtailed kind of search for information. And some of the things that popped up that were really interesting to me was that while today what we say is coming out of the closet often, that's the phrase that we use, originally in the gay community, it was the phrase just coming out was what was used. And in looking at it and sort of reviewing, it was actually gay people were sort of taking on the cultural tradition of debutante balls. And there were these drag style debutante balls where gay people would come out to other gay people. It wasn't about coming out to their families or to straight people. That wasn't even something they considered. It was taking this coming out party that young women usually had to be introduced into society, and taking that and making it part of the gay culture, and having these drag balls where they would come out into their gay society. And that was where that phrase was originally used in the gay community. It was actually used in the straight community around like coming out for the debutantes. So it's a phrase that we've used for a long time to mean different things. And at the time in the gay community, it was less about revealing and more about introduction. And so it was a celebration. It was, maybe like a bar mitzvah, it being introduced to a religious community. Like that was interesting.
Specifically to the existing gay community.
It was within the culture of the gay community. You didn't invite your straight friends. That wasn't what was
Right.
happening. No.
And it probably wasn't applied at the time to coming out to your parents or
No, it was actually had nothing to do with coming out to family or anyone. It was solely, as far as I can understand from the, like I said, the few minor things that I read, but they were pretty legit articles. They were talking about just being introduced to gay society. It was like your introduction, like that young ladies would be introduced to society when they were old enough to date. That was the debutante tradition. When the gay person came into the gay society, they'd be introduced to this little gay debutante ball, drag ball. And I don't know for sure if it was specific the way, like a debutante ball usually was about one person.
Yeah.
You know, we'd have one for me, not for 20 women or whatever.
Yeah. It's
possible that the drag balls were maybe a little bit more group oriented. I don't really know. I'm actually curious now to read more about it. And then in the 80s, this gentleman founded National Coming Out Day, and it was more about taking the step of coming out in larger society to family, to friends, as a way of kind of addressing the impact and the damage of AIDS, right? Like it was killing people. And so he invented or thought of that concept and then as in my belief, and I don't really know and no one's really sure from what I've been able to read exactly how it went from coming out to coming out of the closet.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because like the term closeted has even become like a derivative of coming out of the closet and all of that. So there seems to be some sort of connection that happened at some point.
Well, and the best guess that people have from what I was reading is that it was kind of a mix of debutante balls certainly became less common. Like it's not something that really happens today very much, at least that I'm aware of. That's certainly not widespread, and it's not assumed.
Right.
And so coming out, then people hear that phrase, and they think, oh, you have to come out of something. Right? It's not because the debutante thing was coming out into society. It was, like I said, an introduction. But the phrase coming out without that context sounds like, well, you must have been hiding, right?
Yeah.
So coming out of something. And then the closet has been theorized to be related to the shame aspect of like if you have a secret, you have a skeleton in your closet.
Yeah.
And so, coming out of the closet, taking the skeleton out so that you're not ashamed anymore, you're not hiding. And so that's the theory that I read. And it makes sense to me that like if you're not familiar with coming out into society as a phrase, then it feels like a logical step to go to that. So it's kind of an interesting history of the phrase itself and the different ways that it has been applied in even just this one community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. As I said, I mean, I feel like it's a really positive step in general. And again, more to the point of what you wanted to kind of talk about, the ramifications, the emotional ramifications of staying in the closet and the emotional ramifications of coming out of the closet. I think there's very few things tougher in an LGBTQ person's life than facing up to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and a colleague of mine several years ago did a study on outness. How damaging is outness to a person's mental health and emotional stability and all that kind of stuff. And what they found was that if you are in relationship with someone and you are both at the same level of outness, the impact is on a day-to-day basis pretty negligible. If you're in a situation where you and the person you are closest with are at different levels, it has a lot larger impact. She didn't do long-term study, so the real world implications of a lack of outness, such as your partner dies and you lose your house, like that kind of stuff wasn't really considered. It was more the emotional aspect, the mental health aspect, and the real logistics of it do affect your mental and emotional well-being. But I don't know that people necessarily consider those on a day-to-day basis. So if you and your partner are both about the same out with your family and your friends and your work, they tended to be pretty happy. My guess is, and she didn't, like I said, go into this, at least when I was aware of what she was doing, that if you run into something where you can't visit your partner in the hospital, or you lose your house, or or you can't go to their funeral because those things all happened, probably your level of outness at that point mattered a lot more to you than it might have in that day-to-day thing.
I can imagine many people have ended up in a time of stress and struggle, had to come out to explain the situation, why they wanted to go to their friend's, funeral, or, visit them in the hospital, or divide a property, and suddenly people that they hadn't told about their situation, or, maybe even if they suspected or whatever, it hadn't been confirmed. Yeah, and that almost seems like the worst possible time. Like, talk about taking a stressful situation and then adding to it, because now you have to explain your sexual preferences or whatever.
Right. Well, and I was very out when I was in my relationship, with my lesbian relationship, and I have been less out as someone who's in an open relationship. I mean, obviously I'm talking about it on the show, but I didn't really talk about it publicly in a lot of ways. And there are definitely family members that don't know. I mean, maybe they listen to the show, so hey, sorry for breaking it to you this way. But it's been an interesting balance for me, because I definitely, having gone through that situation with my ex-wife and really seeing the damage that can occur when people don't know the truth of your life, and the ways in which, like, just the subtle ways in which you have to hide things in order to communicate. It can feel deceptive or alienating or distancing.
Well, you're not being true, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah.
And like I said, I fully support everybody that's had a very good excuse. Dad wouldn't understand, or it's not worth the heartache that I'm going to cause. So I get it. And yet there is that ramification for people that have to be closeted. And I think the worst part about it too is that, just like everything else on LGBTQ, there's some that it's easier. There's some that it's much harder. If you're a trans person, at some point, you are likely going to start dressing in public in the opposite sex clothing as what you were assigned. You coming out in that way. And even then, if you're a man trapped in a woman's body, but you like women, then there's the whole thing, like, you're actually coming out as straight-ish once you transition. There's a lot of different aspects to it. And like you said, open relationships, same thing. I've met many people in open relationships, and I think that's the one where I see the most closeted behavior. It's been a part of that culture for so long, to hide being in open relationships.
Well,
it's culturally, like, it's in the gay culture, there's going to be people in your community likely that are going to be fully supportive and wanting to help you come out and support you if you do, and support you if your family rejects you, and all of that stuff. And in, like, poly open relationship culture, generally it's accepted, like, you just don't talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I agree. Even when I was working in the LGBT community, I very firmly supported people need to decide for themselves what feels appropriate and safe. You just don't really know anybody else's story. And so I am an advocate of being present with what's important to you and how you want to express yourself. I'm not really an advocate of everybody has to be out 100% all the time in every way. I think that when you can, like, I had a friend who had a lot of privilege. She was straight and well respected at her position in her job, and she knew she was pretty safe. And so she just was always advocating for LGBT people. And she was just like, I have no risk. I can do this all the time. And I was like, that's really cool. And so I kind of think that that's a great way to go, is just kind of note, where are you able to make things more inviting for someone? And maybe that's not you being out about your whole life, and it still gives you the ability to kind of support the world we want to live in, right?
Yeah.
And then to your point about the poly community, like, or the open community, open relationships versus, my experience with the queer community, I think some of it is also that it's easier to hide an open relationship, especially an open straight relationship. Like my nesting partner, the person I've been with the longest, is male bodied and male presenting. And so we look like a straight couple, and nobody looks for anything else. Like I don't ever have to avoid questions about who I'm dating.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it.
Like I'm not confronted with that very often. But when I am, I feel bad. Like when I realize my other partner is is invisible to someone that I know, it feels bad to me. But it's not as easy to bring up as actually being gay was. There aren't as many openings.
Well, and that actually brings up, I think, the toughest one out of all of the things we're talking about to come out as is bi. And we've talked about this on the show before, but in general, I work with a couple of advocacy groups or have in the past on bi recognition and things like that, because it tends to be that you don't necessarily get the LGBT community support, and you don't tend to get the straight community support. And then it depends on who you're dating at the time. Because if you're in a hetero-looking opposite sex relationship, then nobody's really going to care. And suddenly, if you're in a same-sex relationship, you're coming out essentially as gay, with the possibility of not being gay someday. It's really hard, and it has led to a lot of difficulty in acceptance for bi people in both communities.
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing that brings up to me is that the other thing about coming out is context. So, for example, I've seen when I was working in the LGBTQ community, I've seen people feel a need to come out as Christian or Republican because they know people don't assume that about them. And really, coming out is about other people's assumptions.
Yeah.
Which is why some people don't like to come out, because they're like, I'm not responsible for your assumptions, and I'm not responsible to mind read what your assumptions are. So I'm just going to do me and do my thing. And if you make a mistake in terms of identifying that, that's on you. We can talk about it.
Right. Yeah. Coming out is about a lot more than just LGBT. I mean, obviously, in the context of Coming Out Day and what we're talking about here, but there can be a lot of things that people choose to be closeted about that aren't just their sexuality.
Or feel like they need to hide. I mean, you'll laugh, but like my whole family in the 2016 election was super Bernie. And I loved Bernie, but I was actually, and I hope we don't lose listeners for this, a Hillary fan. And I was right there, right? Like I was nervous. I'm a little nervous, honestly, to say it on the show. I was nervous to talk to my family about it. And I know they love and accept me. And they were so passionate. I was just sort of like, oh, are they going to feel like I'm letting them down because I'm not there?
And this is a great opportunity for listeners that maybe aren't gay or LGBT, to think about something like that. What is it that you've hidden? What have been those ramifications? You can get a little bit of empathy for people that have, different sexual preferences or something. We all do it. And it's really good to look in a mirror once in a while and actually understand our own actions and what it would actually mean, like that thing you consider a dirty little secret, but what if it was affecting your life negatively to be keeping it?
Right. Well, and it does affect your relationships with people. If every time you are talking to someone, your thought that if they knew this, I don't know what would happen is there, it affects your ability to engage or rate like your mental health or your sense of calm or even just as a little bit of a distraction. And once again, not to say that it isn't something you might feel a sense of needing to do.
Right.
And there's a cost to it. And just really acknowledging like that's a cost.
Yeah.
And you're and there's silly things like a lot of my friends would sort of bemoan morning people. Like, I can't stand morning people, blah, blah, blah. And I finally was just like, I'm a morning person. And they were like, well, we forgive you, And it was a little bit of a joke, but I was also like, no, actually, I want to be really clear that like that's happening for me,
Yeah.
and I don't think you really mean you wish they would all die, but but let me just point out,
Yeah.
I'm a morning person.
Well, and that's the thing too, because we can be incredibly cruel to things when we think that we're in an environment where that thing that we're talking about is not around. And that's what actually makes it really hard for some people. Maybe you use the word gay to define things like that's gay. And now you have a friend in your friend group who's actually realizes, oh man, I wouldn't be supported if I came out. Like I might get made fun of. They already make fun of gay, right?
Or
And
this
that's
part
why
of
our
me, yeah.
language is so important.
Or this part of me isn't welcome here.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
rightly, and that I think it's important to recognize that if something isn't welcome, you can be really legit honest about that. And if it's kind of just laziness in a certain way, like instead of describing whatever the thing is, just calling it gay, then that's kind of it's a form of laziness.
Yeah.
And maybe don't do that because you're giving a message you don't mean to give.
Exactly. One of the other things that you brought up way back when we first met, and you had just said this in passing, and I really latched onto it. It's one of my favorite things, and I thought maybe it'd be a good time to bring that up. But the difference between coming out and just living out, being out, not necessarily being in a position where you feel like you need to walk around and tell everybody, but don't necessarily hide who you are, and be gracious and considerate when somebody asks you. I think that is a good compromise that people can think about and carry around with them. Like maybe it doesn't have to be a thing where the first thing you have to do is uncomfortably announce to everybody, "Hey, I am gay." You could be, and maybe in passing you mention going on a date with your boyfriend or husband or something, right? And people will sort of figure it out, and it doesn't have to be weird, and it doesn't have to be big, and it doesn't have to be traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a philosophy that I followed, and I've sort of refined it over the years. Where in that I'm fairly open, like people that are involved in my life in a more regular basis or follow me on Facebook likely know most of the things that I'm interested in. And I have a really close friend from high school that I've stayed friends with on Facebook, and we chat, and we started chatting more often. And my nesting partner and I were going to go visit. And I thought, well, before we visit, I should just make sure that he's aware of this because we were going to stay with him and his wife. And it just felt polite. So I just called him up. I was like, I'm pretty sure you already know this because, you're not dumb. And just in case, like, I'm in an open relationship, I promise no one's going to hit on you. But like, just so you know that that's our world. And if that's uncomfortable for you in some way, I'd rather know while I'm still home on the phone than when I'm staying in your house, because that just feels awkward. So for me, and what you were saying, like that awkward, to me, it's a little bit about avoiding the awkwardness in a variety of ways. Like, because sitting down with someone randomly when you don't really know them all that well and just giving them sort of this list of intimate things has a form of weird awkwardness to it. And sometimes it's the right thing to do. Just get it out there. But staying with someone's home and knowing that there's a possibility that this might be something that's uncomfortable or weird for them that they don't know about, and not actually giving them a chance to opt in feels not just awkward, actually, it feels a little disrespectful to me. So that's why I wanted to have the conversation before we went. And he was like, of course I know. I'm like, okay, thanks, fine. Done.
And I think people would be surprised how people that are close in their life that maybe they feel like they haven't told might already suspect. It's not that outside. If your friends know you, they might know things about you. And maybe you can just open up that door by not trying to hide it as much.
Yeah, just being free. And I'm going to say, like, in light of our new tagline, be the change that you seek, see if there's something like you said that you feel like, whether it's your orientation or your relationship status or your politics, but if there's something about you that you feel like people in your world kind of assume doesn't exist in their world, maybe see what it's like to share that whether it's about being out or sitting down with someone and saying, hey, I wanted you to know that I think clowns are cool, or whatever. We always joke about clowns being horrible. So I don't know, something like that. Just try that on and see what it feels like and what your experience is. And if you feel more connected or nothing, and let us know. We'd love to hear how that goes for people. And for folks that are, LGBT and are going to celebrate National Coming Out Day tomorrow, good job. Good on you. We're happy, and whatever happens, whether you share or don't share, know that not just us, but many people out there support you.
And everyone who's listening, thank you for having the strength to be you. Welcome to the BiCurean moment.
I'm going to share mine. I'm very excited.
Okay.
So I found this. I'm actually not sure how this came up, but in 2016, the Denver Post endorsed Mike Kaufman for the congressional seat he was running for in Aurora. And he was a Republican, and he ended up not winning. But the reason they endorsed him was because he was really stepping up in terms of his district. Like, his district had been redistricted and had gone from being primarily white to being more ethnically diverse. And they were saying, like, well, there's an opportunity here for us to have this referendum on Trump that a lot of lefties really want. This guy has really stepped it up, and we should be rewarding Republicans who are standing up to Trump, who are not voting the party line.
Oh, I have thoroughly agreed with that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was my rant several episodes ago, was about how few Republicans risked anything by even condemning or denouncing flagrantly racist comments that he made. So yeah, I think, and this is kind of the point of the show, and when we talk about being the change, and what polarization looks like, I am very left-leaning, but I am absolutely going to celebrate people on the other side of the thought aisle when they are willing to be good people and step up and do the right things. This isn't about being pro-choice or pro-life. This is about recognizing dangerous behavior, evil behavior, and calling it out, regardless of your political beliefs.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, like, for example, one of the things and this was in 2016, or like, but before the election. And it said, tearing children from the arms of parents, 2018, tearing children from the arms of parents and then isolating them alone is antithetical to the America I grew up in and to the America that I have many times fought to defend. This is what Kaufman wrote, as some of his colleagues equivocated about the travesty occurring at the border.
So let me be the first to say, if Mike Kaufman is ever listening to this episode, thank you.
Right. I just was really...
I may not vote for you, but if somebody tells me they did, I am going to have some respect for them.
Right. He said, this isn't who we are. My colleagues should mark their words, and this moment, history won't remember well those who support the continuation of this policy. And it just, I was really impressed to see it. I was sad to see that he lost. And it was the Denver Post was like, look, Crow's great. He's really great. He's skilled. He's amazing. We love him. We wish he were running somewhere else because Kaufman's one of the good guys.
Yeah.
And we need to reward the Republicans
that
are actually doing the right thing right now, because we need them to feel like they have some kind of political support for their choices. And the other thing was, so the former Marine, Kaufman, made a mad dash to the center since his district was redrawn to include more minorities and fewer Republicans. He told us it has not only made him a better congressperson, but also a better person, and we believe him. He's a conservative with a big heart. Like, I was just like, he learned Spanish because members of his district spoke Spanish. He spent time in the mosques. He fought for human rights in Ethiopia because he's a huge Ethiopian contingent.
You know what? I know people that are on ballots under Democrat that haven't done that much.
Right.
Real good. Things I would agree with. And before the people listening and even myself, I'm challenging right now to take a look at what candidates have done. And you know what? If you can legitimately say that just because, they're in the opposite party of what you would tend to vote or what you think you believe, maybe you should give people a chance. Again, I'm not certain that I would vote for Mike Kaufman. I've heard his name and I know a little bit about him. I know he's a Republican.
Right. It's not, this isn't enough to make that happen. And I really appreciated that they gave a strong list of, but I also really appreciated the Denver Post stepping in that way to say, let's consider a bigger picture than revenge. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that was my BiCurean moment. Was, I didn't live in Aurora and I didn't actually see this at the time, but to really note that and say, okay, this is a moment of hope for me that there are people
They want to do the right thing
that wanna do the right
regardless
thing.
of their political party.
and including that Denver Post, right? Like
Yeah.
the editorial committee
Good for them for bringing it up.
took that stance. And so I definitely I want to look for more of that too. Because I
I
feel
think we
like there's
should.
more out there, and just to really and truly highlight that, I think
I
that's a
think
good
we
thing
w-
to me.
I think we'd all be better people if we celebrated the things we see positive regardless of political party.
Yeah. So that's mine.
Mine is an education lesson. It's another thing to add to your list of acronym letters in LGBTQ+.
Okay.
And that is sapiosexual. And interestingly enough, in the news in the last several weeks, a couple of like higher profile people, Mark Ronson, who's a music producer, have admitted to being sapiosexual, which is interesting because for those unfamiliar with the term, it means that you're attracted to intelligence. And there's definitely a connotation, although not in all cases, that intelligence that you'd be attracted to would be in lieu of the sex of a person you'd be attracted to, i.e., you might be bi, but you're generally attracted to intelligent people regardless of their gender. And I just thought it was positive that there's a lot of coverage on this and the media is not lambasting it in any kind of negative way. It's a term that I had heard before and I didn't even know what it meant until I read an article recently. But
Nice.
realistically, I just think it's great because it's yet another way that people can be themselves. So, in honor of Coming Out Day, I thought I would share yet another thing in the ways that some high profile people have been coming out.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. The more opportunity there is for people to see the possibilities, I think the better it's going to be for everybody. I mean, a lot of times folks don't follow a path. That's what we talked a little bit about with Jill, because they don't recognize that the path exists or is possibility.
Yeah,
That's a lot of lost
absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening. If you have ideas, feedback, thoughts, please find us on social media. We are BiCurean on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Instagram. You can give us a call and probably leave a message at 720-507-7309 or email podcast@BiCurean.com.
And if you like what we're doing, please tell your friends about us and share the episodes you find most interesting.